said my paper, you could see it followed a bit from his, and I can see that. But anyway, so yes, the question, what is a man? My answer to this is that a man is a person who would make a good father. It makes sense that we've been shaped by our reproductive role. But fatherhood means so much more than biology. The general who cares about his young soldiers, the master who takes on a new apprentice, the men who lead the church, they're all demonstrating qualities of fatherhood, as were the founding fathers who established a new political realm. So what are the qualities of fatherhood we should be inculcating in our boys? Firstly, a father is a provider. If you explore the dawn of our human existence, male provisioning was built into our DNA. The process of becoming upright caused our foremothers to give birth early. Compared to other primates, humans are born 12 months premature. The only reason we were able to survive and to have the extended childhoods which allowed the acquisition of language and culture was because of the father's consistent care. For while feminists are fond of drawing attention to the role of allo-parents, the grandmothers, the aunties, siblings and so on, in ensuring survival, it required specifically the role of the father to survive and evolve. For example, research on other species has shown that brain size is a function of the constancy of the father's provisioning. It was only because of paternal investment that we were able to grow our exceptionally large brains. Research has also shown that allo-parents contribute to the fertility levels of the mother through their provisioning, but this only happens when the father is around. This is interesting because it suggests that the father was having some indirect effects on the allo-parent, which meant that they helped to provide for his child. Perhaps the father organized these others into providing, or maybe he supervised things so that provisions were not siphoned off by some opportunistic allo-parent. Who knows? The importance attached to male provisioning persists for both men and women till the present day. Where men have lower wages, women are significantly less likely to marry them. And when they do get married, they are much more likely to get divorced. But provisioning is about much more than bringing home the bacon, and it is important to remember this at a time when the provisioning capacity of men has been so significantly compromised. Men provide shelter, whether this is through renovation or building houses. They provide education for their children, teaching them skills, with a particularly important role in relation to their sons. Men provide social networks. Men play a particular role in the transmission of religious faith. Fathers also provide protection. Traditionally, this was done by protecting the household against intruders or through going to war to defend the society which cocooned the family. But protection means so much more. Fathers provide a sense of security which gives children the confidence to navigate the world. Fathers have an inbuilt radar for protecting their daughters from men who would do them harm. A BBC children's series I'm fond of watching with my daughter, So Awkward, shows boys subtly steering the girls away from sabotaging relationships with their best friend. While men may be violent with each other, when it comes to the management of broader human relationships, they have a knack for the avoidance of harm. Just as mothers present a strong front to their children, thus protecting them from the emotional turbulence of human existence, when men hide their emotions and are strong and silent, this is not, as the feminists tell us, toxic masculinity. It is men protecting their families from the stresses of the outside world. For example, a piece of research about men in the Australian outback revealed how much women panicked when their men were in tears. This beautiful quote from The Grapes of Wrath shows us, when men hide their emotions, everyone feels safe. This is a quote. But it's much longer than this. It's really, I like it. After a while, the faces of the watching men lost their bemused perplexity and became hard and angry and resistant. Then the women knew that they were safe and that there was no break. Then they asked, "What will we do?" And the men replied, "I don't know, but it was all right." The women knew it was all right, and the watching children knew it was all right. Women and children knew deep in themselves that no misfortune was too great to bear if their men were whole. Being proficient and competent in the public realm enables fathers to act as a bridge for their children so they can move between the security of the family and take on the challenges of the outside world. This bridging role starts early. Research suggests that even when fathers are engaged in primary caring, they do this in a different way from the mother. They are much more likely to take their children on trips and adventures to explore the outside world. They focus much more than mothers on playing, which, in its interaction with objects, people, rules of social interaction, can be seen as preparation for the world of work. Fathers encourage risk-taking through exploration and rough-and-tumble play. Fathers allow intellectual failure in challenging games. When dealing with a child's problems, men dwell less on how the child feels and more on how to solve the problem. This moves the child from a focus on himself to the outside world. Perhaps this is why children who spend more time with fathers have higher levels of empathy, because they're less focused on themselves. In all they do, fathers are involved in knitting their children into a society and helping them to carve a place in the outside world. To be providers and protectors involves a competency and mastery of the public realm, the world beyond the home. Provisioning requires the skills to garner resources, whether hunting, managing livestock, or earning a wage. Protection involves being able to recognize danger before it gets too close to home. For example, those who had sufficient understanding of Hitler's anti-Semitic policies were able to get their families out of the country before the Second World War. A young girl was able to protect a beach full of people from a tsunami because her geography lesson had given her an understanding of the operation of the natural world. For those who are Christian, being able to identify and understand the cunning of Satan plays a crucial protective role. Therefore, to become men, boys need to move away from the security of their family and be integrated into wider society to acquire knowledge and a different set of norms. For boys, the process of separation starts early, but there are different interpretations of how this comes about. Feminists such as Chowderao posit that parents encourage the son to disconnect from the mother because dependency is incompatible with masculinity. This results in psychic wounds, which provide a convenient explanation for toxic masculinity. However, as a predictable human pattern, Chowderao's explanation is incompatible with all those women who argue that they got less attention than their brothers. While it is accepted that boys do learn to differentiate themselves from their mothers, psychoanalysts would argue that it is identification with the father that plays a crucial role. I'm not a psychoanalyst, so I can't say too much about this. But what appears to be also incredibly important is a boy's innate tendency, which does not appear in girls, to move away from adults and gravitate towards their peers. Joyce Benenson, a psychologist, shows in a range of experiments involving puppets and videos how even as babies, boys are attracted towards groups of faces, whereas girls will gaze at the single face. This tendency develops into a pattern whereby girls form dyadic relationships, whereas boys form increasingly complex patterns of social relationships and groups which merge into enlarging groups. Whether one looks at the organization of an army or boys left to their own devices, the patterning is much the same. Benenson argues that men evolved this group-oriented behavior so that they could band together to defeat the enemy. The survival of the fittest meant that the genes which survived were those of the men who were most successful at defeating the other group. To support her thesis, she brings together a wonderful array of evidence about boys' play and how from the earliest ages boys are fantasizing about enemies and creating games which involve strategies of attack and defense. However, what is perhaps most remarkable about male behavior is their liking of competition. But this is not the competition for personal advantage which one finds among women fighting for resources to shore up their family. The point of male competitiveness is to maximize the functionality of the group. Through this intense competitiveness, boys weak in one area will develop a strength or specialization in another so they can make a valuable contribution to the group. She also shows how boys, but not girls, recognize, comment on, and value this expertise. Through the competitive process, groups are organized in a way that gets highly competitive individuals to acknowledge that others have more skills in some areas than they do, and these highly competitive beings will happily defer to someone more skilled than themselves. This competitive behavior invariably involves fighting and conflict, but another remarkable aspect is the ease with which males reconcile, unless it seems they're brothers. Benenson explains, after a serious fight, former allies find some ways to signal that hostilities are over. They reconcile. Chimpanzees actually kiss, embrace, squeeze one another's genitals, and then it's back to business as usual. This fighting serves to recalibrate the social order in a way which facilitates its functionality. Girls, by contrast, avoid conflict. They try to be equal. They actually forget who won and who lost. Another feature of boys' behavior is an incredible aptitude for inventing games and the rules of games. Given the same resources, boys would play significantly longer than the girls. This included spending a great deal of time quarreling about the rules. The researchers also observed that the boys had very much more fun than the girls. Rules hold a deep attraction for males. They abide by them even when they kill. At a certain point, this rambunctious male behavior needs to be tamed. As they get older, increases in testosterone are accompanied by a decrease in fear. Unrestrained young men, practiced in group competition, can wreak havoc without a real enemy. Problems are worsened when the ratio of young men to old increases. This is known as the youth bulge. Where these exist, it's well recognized that the risks of serious conflict, serious social conflict, are likely to grow. The sorts of societies anthropologists study have wonderful ways of dealing with this. Boys are taken off to the men's house where they're instructed in rites and rituals and secrets, which form an elaborate and symbolic imitation of the female process of reproduction. The most elaborate of rituals involves the letting of blood, and this final initiation occurs once the men have learnt to provide. As Margaret Mead explained, while women make children, only men can make men. Through this process, young men are inserted into a social order which transcends the particularistic concerns of individual families. They are subordinated to the rules of their elders, while their elders are servants of a divinity which is representative of and greater than the whole. And yes, this is a patriarchy, but it is not a patriarchy which subordinates women. Rather, it is a patriarchy which tames and subordinates men. Once they have become part of this male-headed society, the men are ready to become fathers. This is because they have been schooled in how to protect and provide and care for their families. This is the whole point of the grueling, painful process of male initiation, to turn raw, untamed youth into men who'd be good fathers. This is what patriarchy does to men. By moving out of the family and being brought to heel by their elders, men created an overarching social organization which enabled the transcendence of individual families. The particularistic concerns which could tear apart the fabric of society were sublimated to the interests of the greater whole. This was facilitated by the male love of rules. Rules serve a critical function for coordinating a community. Without them, the community would break down. Males thrive on competition, but this competition was not about the triumph of the individual at the expense of another's failure. Rather, it was about finding the best person for the job and the maximization of an individual's skill. Similarly, for men, high status was not about personal power, but the strength and resilience of the overall group by ensuring that the best leader was in charge. Hierarchy ensured the distribution of skills to serve the whole. For women, by contrast, high status signalled that one of them had successfully accumulated resources to maximise her own reproductive fitness. Therefore, other women would lose out. The logic of separate spheres, each with their own value systems, worked in a world where the public realm served the private. The private realm of the family as the ordering principle underpinned the male organisation of the world. But with feminism, the private realm of home, family, even local community was subordinated to the world of work and politics. The result was the disintegration of separate spheres. Women prioritised the labour market and flooded into it. Even children and the elderly ceased to be cared for in the home. Women were seen in terms of the contribution they could make to GDP. Status was understood by the masculine trope of career, and children and families came second to the power and status which could be derived from work. Eventually, whether they liked it or not, nearly all women were forced into work. The reason the family was so weakened was because feminists explicitly, actively, and intentionally destroyed the fatherhood of men. Men were ripped out of families when, in 1989, Baroness Hale declared that the rule of law that a father is the natural guardian of his legitimate child is abolished. Since then, the numbers of children growing up with their fathers has dramatically declined. A great deal of effort went into destroying the provider role, which was understood to be the source of marital breakdown, domestic violence, men leaving their children, and so on. This effort underpins our policy focus to this day. Boys have been allowed to wallow in educational backwaters while girls get ahead at university and school. The economic clout of women has increased while we have been reducing the relative value of male employment. This has been done either by reducing the relative share of male employment and, of course, simply by increasing female earnings. This is why feminists are so unrelenting about the gender pay gap, even when it is acknowledged that women are paid the same for the same work. It's not about equality, but about women and children being able to survive independently of men. With fatherhood eroded, young men are having difficulties in the transition to manhood. Failure to launch is one outcome. For a tragic few, their first initiation is attempt to become female, so remote is the prospect of ever becoming a man. As the boundaries between private and public have been eroded, the feminine ethos has spilled into politics and employment. The modus operandi of women has come to dominate the public sphere. Where men focus on fairness, for women, equality trumps the rules of the game. Competition is eroded where there are attempts to distribute rewards equally. Hours of work may be restricted to ensure that no one unfairly gets ahead. Benenson reports how some women's football teams employed male referees because of female sensitivity overcame the rule to be fair. This sentiment, writ large, is the victim culture, where it is the special needs of a minority rather than the abstract rules of fairness which shape our law. A feminine sensitivity to people's feelings has led to the insistence on safe spaces. But the family, where sensitivity should be protected, has been abandoned and exposed. Instead of being cared for by their family, children are left at the mercy of our education system, where they are groomed by the sex education lobby and the LGBT wolves. The barriers which ordered our world between private and public have been smashed and replaced by a wall between women and men. It is difficult to know what the solution is, but where men and women come together, get married, have children who they care for, and maybe even homeschool them, when they reject the tropes of feminism and love one another despite the pressures against them, this is the most revolutionary act which can strengthen the family and rejuvenate a robust and manly public sphere.